Okie doke. If you've been listening online, we're still trucking along here, working with this. I guess the overall theme is still the family of Yah, but last week we talked about the way the camp was set up and how they were positioned around the tabernacle under the banners. And we talked about the banner on the east being Judah, the banner on the south being Reuben, on the west it was Ephraim, and on the north it was Dan. And we talked about those being possibly tied to Ezekiel's vision, and maybe even the Gospels, and on into the book of Revelation. And we're working through that to see if there's anything to that. I think that there is. So in today's journey, we're going to recall that what we talked about last week. During that time, the Israelites had just been delivered from Egypt. They were brought to Mount Sinai, and they entered the covenant with Yah. And the camp was set around the presence of Yah and the Holy of Holies. Now, where were they at graphically? Not graphically. Why did I say that? That's not what I typed. Where were they at geographically? Graphically, they were just hanging out on a picture. Geographically, they were not in the land yet, right? They were in the wilderness. They camped around the tabernacle, and everybody was looking in to the Holy of Holies from the outside, of course, you know. They were out, but they were still outside the land that was promised to Abram. Okay, but they're still right on schedule. Now I'm going to repeat again some of the things that we've talked about in the past. And you don't have to turn there. This is just a repeat. But in Genesis 15, during that covenant that Yah made with Abraham, in verse 12, it tells us that when the sun was going down, the deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. And he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them for 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Now in Exodus 12, we find out that in verses 40 and 41, now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies of Yah went out from the land of Egypt. And I've stated before that discrepancy, in my opinion, I think it's answered this way. In Exodus 1, 8 through 13, it says this. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. I think that took place approximately 30 years after they got there. It goes on to say, and he said to his people, look, the children of Israel are more and mightier than we are. Well, we know that took a couple minutes. We talked about how many went down, 72, 70. Remember, we were just talking about that last week or the week before. Now they're more and mightier than the Egyptians. Verse 10, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happened in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. That's key. They're going to go up out of the land. We don't want that. We want them here, right? That's what the Egyptians are thinking. So they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities. And in verse 12, But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, meaning the Israelites. And they were the dread, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with vigor. So they're right on Yah's time clock. We talked about Yah being faithful a couple of times already today. All right. He's not lost track of his time clock. We're still right on his time clock. Okay. So moving on from the camp. All right. I want to fast forward to the dedication of Solomon's temple. And you'll see why this is important, hopefully, by the end of this study. So in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, go ahead and turn there. We're going to be there for a minute. 2 Chronicles chapter 7. Now, by this time, they had gotten into the land of Egypt. Joshua conquered the land. The land was divided, set up the way that it was supposed to be set up. Things moved along. Joshua died. People started doing what they wanted to do in their own sight. Yah had to send the judges, and they wanted a king, and you know all that as we get here. Now, in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, Solomon, David's son, is the king, and he's the one that built the house for Yah. We've been through that several weeks ago, okay? So picking it up in verse 1 of chapter 7, when Solomon had finished praying, fire came down from heaven. Does that sound familiar? Has that ever happened before? That's one of those hyperlink words, huh? It should, and it consumed the burnt offerings and the sacrifice, and the glory of Yah filled the temple. So here we see, in verse 2, and the priest could not enter the house of Yah because the glory of Yah had filled Yah's house. And when all the children of Israel saw how the fire came down and the glory of Yah in the temple, they bowed their faces to the ground on the pavement and worshiped and praised Yah, saying, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Then the king and all the people offered sacrifices before Yah. King Solomon offered sacrifices of 22,000 bulls and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the people dedicated the house of Yah. Now, jump down to verse 8. At that time, Solomon kept the feast 7 days, and all Israel with him, a very great assembly from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt. And on the 8th day, they held a sacred assembly, for they observed the dedication of the altar 7 days and the feast for 7 days. And on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people away to their tents, joyful and glad of heart for the good that Yah had done for David, for Solomon, and for the people of Israel. Now, what is significant about the feast of the 7th month?
Sukkot.
It is Sukkot, yes.
It ends with on the 8th day with another Sabbath, that is a picture of new beginnings.
Yep. And what do we know is going to happen on Sukkot ultimately? We're going to, right, and we're going to dwell, right? Okay, so that dwelling is the Moedim of tabernacles is leading us, pointing to the event that's yet still to happen for us, okay? But that is the assembly of us and Yah together again, all right? It was there for a minute in the garden, and it's been a long minute since then. But that's what we're pointing to. So I came to this I included Solomon in this for that purpose right there. Verse 11 says, thus Solomon finished the house of Yah, the king's house, and Solomon successfully accomplished all that came to his heart to make the house of Yah and his own home. And in verse 12, it says, Yah appeared to Solomon by night and said to him, I have heard your prayer. And now who's speaking here? Okay. I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a house of sacrifice. John, I think your scripture says slaughter, right? Okay. Everybody else in here, from my research, this is 2 Chronicles 7, verse 12. It says a house of sacrifice. Okay, verse 13. When I shut up heaven and there is no rain, or command the locusts to devour the land, or send pestilence among who?
My people.
Among my people. Okay. And then verse 14, very familiar to us. We hear it a lot. It is quite frequently, mostly on days that end in a Y, spoken a little bit out of context, okay? But it reads, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and heal their land. Okay? What land is he talking about? He's talking about the land that was, yes. Okay? We confuse that with our land sometimes. But in context, the land he's talking about. Now let me show you why. Whose land does he call it here? He says their land. In verse 14, he says their land. Now watch what happens in a couple of verses here. In verse 15, now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to prayer made in this place. Verse 16, for I have chosen and sanctified this house that my name may be there forever, and my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. Verse 17, as for you, if you walk before me as your father David walked, and do according to all that I have commanded him, or all that I have commanded you, and if you keep my statutes and judgments, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom as I covenanted with David your father, saying, you shall not fail to have a man as ruler in Israel. Verse 19, but if you turn away and forsake my statutes and my commandments, which I have set before you, and you go serve other gods and worship them, then I will root them. Who is the them there? It's my people. I will root them from whose land? Ah, okay. Which I have given them, and this house which I have sanctified for my name, I will cast out of my sight, and will make it a proverb and a byword among the people. And as for this house, which is exalted, everyone who passes by it will be astonished and say, why has Yah done thus to this land and this house? And they will answer, because they forsook Yahweh Elohim of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and embraced other gods and worshiped them and served them. For he has brought all this calamity on them. Okay? He accepts the temple built by Solomon as a house of prayer and a house of sacrifice, and Elohim puts his name on it, and his glory descends upon the temple. All right? So that's what was told Solomon. And much like we read in Deuteronomy, there are some good things that happen when you obey, and there are some bad things that happen when you don't obey. And this is basically what we were just told here as we're dealing with the house. Now I want you to turn to Ezekiel chapter 1. Ezekiel chapter 1. We'll start in verse 1. Now we're fast forwarding again here. Let me point out, we've talked about the garden many times. Then we've talked about the tabernacle in the wilderness, how they were camped around. The glory of Yah was in there, descended upon the mercy seat, okay? And everybody was looking in. Now, we just read from Solomon that it was a temple in the land and his glory was there. And they were told, Solomon, the leader, was told, if you'll do what I say, I'm going to do some things for you. However, if you don't, there's going to be some other things that happen. They didn't, did they? And so now we're going to see some of those other things. All right? Ezekiel chapter 1. I'll touch on that in a minute. Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Chebar, that the heavens were open, and I saw visions from Elohim. Now this is Ezekiel talking, okay? That timeline seems pretty specific, does it not? Okay. Verse 2. On the 5th day of the month, which was in the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of Yah was upon him there. All right, that date, I'm going to speculate, and I'm going to try to prove this speculation as I go. The 30th year, I think, is most likely counting from the Jubilee. And that's got a lot of ramifications to it. Ezekiel, being a priest, would have known that day and that count. We don't have any record in the Tanakh of them actually celebrating the year of Jubilee.
Well, it says when you go into the land, you will celebrate it.
Right.
So they had to be in the land before they ever started, but they never did.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay? And we're going to go into that. All right? So the 30th year is most likely counting from Jubilee. All right? From Jubilee. So this took place, what he's writing here right now took place approximately 30 years, or took place 30 years, 4 months, and 5 days from the last Jubilee. But as John and I were just discussing, the Jubilee that was explained how they were supposed to do it in Leviticus 25, we don't have any record of that ever happening. Okay? Now we can prove that never happened here in just a minute. Okay? The fact that the land of the Chaldeans and the river Chebar is mentioned ties us to the exile, right? They're not in their own land at this time. Ezekiel is not in his own land. We just read in Solomon, or we just read in 2 Chronicles, what was told to Solomon, that they were going to be driven out. So that's taken place. Okay? Yah has moved them out because of their disobedience. Now, Yah tells us through the prophet Jeremiah, I'll read this. If you want to hold your finger there and turn to Jeremiah 25, verse 8, it tells us one of the reasons that they were removed from the land. Jeremiah 25, starting in verse 8. Thus says Yah of hosts, because you have not heard my words. Verse 9, behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, says Yah, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land, against the inhabitants, and against these nations all around, and will utterly destroy them, and make them an astonishment, a hissing, a perpetual desolation. Moreover, I will take from them the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstones, and the light of the lamp. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Then it shall come to pass, when the 70 years are completed, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, the land of the Chaldeans, for their iniquity, says Yah, and I will make it a perpetual desolation. So I will bring on my land the words which I have pronounced against it, all that is written in this book, which Jeremiah has prophesied concerning all nations. Verse 14, for many nations and great kings shall be served by them also, and I will repay them according to their deeds and according to the works of their own hand. All right, let me back up. Jeremiah is the one that tells us the time frame. This has to be a couplet. Jeremiah tells us the time frame. The time frame is 70 years. Okay? They're going to be in exile for 70 years. In 2 Chronicles chapter 36, starting in verse 15, we get the reason, the one of the reasons that I was telling you about just a minute ago. 2 Chronicles 36, verse 15, and Yahweh Elohim of their fathers sent warnings to him by messengers, rising up early and sending them, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked the messengers of Elohim, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of Yah rose up against his people, till there was no remedy. Verse 17. Therefore he brought against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with a sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or virgin, on the aged or the weak. He gave them all into his hand. 2 Chronicles 17, or excuse me, 2 Chronicles 36, verse 17. And therefore he brought against them the king of the Chaldeans, who had killed their young men with a sword in the house of their sanctuary, and they had no compassion on young man or virgin, on aged or the weak, and he gave them all into his hand. And all the articles of the house of Elohim, great and small, the treasures of the house of Yah, and the treasures of the king and of his leaders, all these he took to Babylon. And they burned the house of Elohim, broke down the wall of Jerusalem, burned all its places with fire, and destroyed all its precious possessions. And those who escaped from the sword he carried away to Babylon, where they became servants to him and his sons until the rule of the kingdom of the Persians. Verse 21 is key. To fulfill the word of Yah by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. As long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill the 70 years. Now, we're told in Leviticus 25 that every 7 years is supposed to be a Shemitah. And when you have 7 of those Shemitahs, then you get to the Jubilee. That's how it counts out, okay? This is telling us that for 490 years, they didn't keep the Shemitah properly. They may have done some things, and they didn't keep the Jubilee. They didn't give the land its rest. And therefore, Yah is giving the land its rest right now. So, zooming back to Ezekiel 1 again, okay? It came to pass in the 30th year in the 4th month. So that's why, that's part of the reason I think they're tied together, and that it's 30 years from the Jubilee. Because Yah's timetable is never messed up. He's not lost track of anything. All right? So at this point, let's recap where Ezekiel's at. Where was he at? He was in Babylon, right? Okay. He's out of the land that he was in, just like we just read in 2 Chronicles 7. Not only were they out of the land of Jerusalem, they were out of the land, out of the city of Jerusalem. The temple's been destroyed. Okay? So all of that is happening, or has happened, all right? And Ezekiel's outside the land. And he has this vision. Now, remember with me, Ezekiel being outside the land is another timestamp. That means the house of Israel, the tribes to the north, they've already been driven out of the land a long time ago. And the house of Judah is the leadership. They're supposed to be the one bearing the scepter. They're supposed to be the ones that are leading people to the way that Yah is telling them to live. And here they are, just now they're outside the land. Okay? Because they didn't listen to his commandments. They didn't obey his commandments and his judgments. Okay? So, Ezekiel 1, verse 4. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind was coming from the north, a great cloud with a raging fire engulfing itself. And the brightness was all around it, and radiating out of its midst was the color of amber, and out of the midst of the fire. Verse 15. From within it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and there was an appearance they had, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Each one had 4 faces, each one had 4 wings. All right? Now this fire that's coming in the wilderness, that rings a bell too. It's a great cloud and a raging fire. What was that in Exodus? That represented the presence of Yah. Okay? We're going to see in this vision, eventually, if this long-winded guy will get there, that there's a throne being seen. Okay? And what does that mean? That means that he's not in the temple anymore. He's not in the tabernacle anymore. He's not in the temple anymore. He's outside the land, revealing things to Ezekiel in this vision. So, I'm going to get a little bit ahead of myself. What happened here was the people began to trust in the temple, but we're going to see it's worse than that, because they really didn't trust in the temple fully. There was some idolatry going on. So jumping down to verse 10 of chapter 1 in Ezekiel. As for the likeness of their faces, each face had the face of a man, each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, each of the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and each one had the face of an eagle. Now I covered this verse specifically, and last week we tied it together. It just so happens that on the right side of the setup of the tabernacle was Judah. On the east side, or the right side, as you're looking down, it was Judah. Judah is a lion. The lion's whelp from Genesis 49. And on the left side was the ox, Ephraim, the servant. Okay. Let's see. Okay, verse 11. Thus were their faces. Their wings stretched upward, two wings of each one touched the other, and two covered their bodies. And each one went straight forward. They went wherever the Spirit wanted to go, and they did not turn when they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, and the appearance of torches going back and forth among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and out of the fire went lightning. Jumping down to verse 22. The likeness of the firmament above the heads of the living creatures was like the color of an awesome crystal stretched out over their heads. And under the firmament, their wings spread out straight, one toward another. Each one had two which covered one side, and each one had two which covered the other side of the body. And when they went, I heard the noise of the wings, like the noise of many waters, like the voice of the Almighty, a tumult, like the noise of an army. And when they stood still, they let down their wings. Jump down to verse 26. Above the firmament, over their heads, was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like a sapphire stone. On the likeness of the throne was the likeness of appearance of a man high above it. Also, from the appearance of his waist upward, I saw, as it were, the color of amber, and the appearance of fire all around it. And from the appearance of his waist downward, I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire and brightness. Verse 28, like the appearance of a rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the brightness around it. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yah. So when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard a voice of one speaking. So right here, Ezekiel tells us that is the glory of Yah. Again, I want to point out, we watched in the tabernacle setting in the wilderness, the glory of Yah came down inside the Holy of Holies. All right? In the temple, the glory of God, Yah came down and filled the temple, and the priests couldn't go in it. All right? Here, we read the temple's been destroyed. Jerusalem, the people have been taken out. They're outside the land, and we're seeing the glory of Yah outside the land. Ezekiel's outside the land, and in this vision appears to show us that presence of Yah, the fire, the glory, the throne, that's the presence. It's showing us this in the vision. Now, Jeremiah the prophet told us Yah put his people out of the land so that the land could get his rest. But Ezekiel, the priest, gives us even more detail in Ezekiel 8. Now, I told you one of the reasons was so that the land could get its Sabbath. I want you to turn to Ezekiel chapter 8. Because the land getting its rest wasn't the only reason. And we're going to go through some of those other reasons right now. Starting in verse 1 of Ezekiel 8. And it came to pass in the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I sat in my house with the elders of Judah sitting before me, that the hand of Yah fell upon me there. Then I looked, and there was a likeness like the appearance of fire, from the appearance of his waist downward, fire, and from his waist upward, the appearance of brightness, the color of amber. Verse 3. He stretched out the form of a hand, and took me by a lock of my hair. And the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and heaven and brought me in vision of Elohim to Jerusalem, to the door of the north gate of the inner court, where the seat of the image of jealousy was, which provokes to jealousy. All right. At this point in Ezekiel's writing, is the temple destroyed? I don't know. I know that this is a vision. I don't know if Yah's showing him what already happened, because they're already out of the land. I don't know the timing on that. I just have to confess that. But he takes him in vision from Babylon back to Jerusalem, takes him to the temple, and shows him that in the inner court of the temple is the seat of the image of jealousy. That's a pagan idol. Verse 4. And behold, the glory of Elohim of Israel was there, like the vision that I saw in the plain. Okay? So apparently at this time in the vision, the glory of Yah is still in the temple, but he's pointing out that the image of jealousy is there. Verse 5. Then he said to me, Son of man, lift up your eyes now towards the north. So I lifted my eyes toward the north, and there, north of the altar gate, was the image of jealousy in the entrance. Furthermore, he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The great abominations that the house of Israel commits here, to make me go far away from my sanctuary. Now turn again, you will see greater abominations. So it's going to get worse. He's taking this progressively and showing them what's going on. We clicking, sister? Okay. All right. Verse 7. So he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, there was a hole in the wall. And he said to me, Son of man, dig into the wall. And when I dug into the wall, there was a door. And he said to me, Go in and see the wicked abominations they are doing there. All right? So it's the door of the court. There's a hole in the wall. He digs in the wall. He sees a door. This too is inside the temple. Verse 10. So I went and I saw, and there every sort of creeping thing, abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed all around on the walls. Verse 11. And there stood before them 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel. And in their midst stood Jazaniah, the son of Shaphan. Each man had a censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. And he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in the room of his idols. For they say, Yah does not see us. Yah has forsaken the land. So this is another reason that I'm not sure. I know part of them were taken out. Was the temple destroyed yet? I don't know. Maybe not at this point, because he's still pointing out that they're saying he's forsaken the land, meaning, he allowed the enemy to get us. He didn't allow the enemy to get him. He brought the enemy. In fact, he called the enemy his servant. If you remember, Nebuchadnezzar, my servant. All right. Verse 13. And then he said to me, turn again. You'll see greater abominations than that they're doing. And so he brought me to the door of the north gate of Yah's house. And to my dismay, women were sitting and weeping for Tammuz. Who's Tammuz?
The idol.
That's it. Yeah.
Ashra, whatever.
It's a pagan god, right? Verse 15. Then he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Turn again, and you will see greater abominations than these. So he brought me to the inner court of Yah's house. And there, at the door of the temple of Yah, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs toward the temple of Yah and their faces toward the east, and they were worshiping the sun toward the east. And he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Is it a trivial thing to the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence, and they have returned to provoke me to anger. Indeed, they put a branch to their nose. Therefore, I also will act in fury. My eye will not spare them, nor will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not hear them. Okay? So, verse 16 is probably the climax of this whole idolatry thing. Ezekiel's brought into the inner court, and about 25 men stand there. Going back to the wilderness, as they camped around, they were looking in at the Holy of Holies, right? Looking in at the glory of Yah. When we go to Solomon's temple, the people were coming in 3 times a year, coming in to worship Yah at his house that he took as his house. Here, they have their backs to the glory of Yah, and they're looking towards the east, towards the sun. Think about that. They turn their backs on Yah's sanctuary. They turn their faces toward creation, not the Creator. It's a complete reversal of the covenant worship. The alignment of the camp in the wilderness, under the banners are Judah, Reuben, Ephraim, and Dan. We just talked about that. The worshipers faced towards the dwelling. That was the worshipers. What we just read about was the leaders, folks. And we've said this many times in here. When the leaders mess up, way more people than just the leaders end up facing the consequences. So, this chapter reveals the covenant corruption, the hidden sin, the polluted worship, and the highlights of the coming departure of Yah's glory from the temple, from Jerusalem and from the land. The people assumed that Yah would remain among them no matter what, no matter how they lived. But Ezekiel shows that covenant rebellion has filled the sanctuary with defilement. The tragedy is it's not merely paganism outside Israel. The tragedy is paganism inside the covenant community. Yet before God passes judgment, he marks those that are faithful among all this corruption. As we move on through Ezekiel, chapters 9, 10, and 11, we'll try to hit that next week. We'll see just how Elohim accomplishes this. But I'm going to stop here for this week. What I'm attempting to show you is what's taken place in relation to the glory of Yah. Because we're going to see that they're out of the land. Yah's still working amongst them out of the land. We've talked about it over several studies back. They do come back into the land, but it's under totally different circumstances. They're not ruling themselves. Okay? They do build another temple. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. But the glory of Yah doesn't come into that temple. It does, but later. So I'm going to just kind of leave it right there for right now. And again, he's not lost track of his timing. He knows exactly where we're at, and where he knew where they were at. He knows exactly where we're at right now. As this goes on, we're going to carry this. They're going to touch a little bit on how he went about this. How there were people that were upset, were mourning over the wretchedness that they were seeing, and they're going to be set apart. We'll see that. But we'll continue on next week, and we're actually going to get into the goal is to get back into the land, and then we get to the second temple, and then we get to Yeshua again. And some of the descriptions that were given of Yeshua in the early chapters of his ministry, in the early chapters of the writers, and the way that the angles that the writers write from. So we're going to tie that together too. But for now, we're going to stop there. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Did I overwhelm anybody? Yes, ma'am.
I think it's really cool, the visual that he got to see of the elders and them praying, because I see it from a different perspective. Literally, they were in the closeness of Yah in his temple, which means that because if you were to ask any of them, they would be like, I'm completely worshiping him. They never denied him. So it was a really perverted train of thought. So it helps me to self-evaluate my life. Like, because remember the presence of God is in us now, like a spirit. So it's a lot more closer than home. And I'm not saying the temple certainly is obviously, it's a beautiful demonstration, but how many times have I turned my back and thinking I'm doing the proper worshiping, but in reality, it's perverted of my own thinking to be like, well, I'm still, or he can't see me. Like, I think for me as humans, I can be very delusional at times. I'm always trying to self-evaluate every day to be like, where is this stemming from? Why am I doing this? I think it's really, I don't know. That's how I see it. I think it's cool. I mean,
that's one of the points that I'm trying to make in all of this.
A lot of us do, well, we should. I mean,
maybe
I'm not perfect.
Well, the scripture tells us that our hearts are deceitful. The scripture, we can deceive ourselves very easily, right? Now, I don't know how many of you, as I was reading through that, were clicking off on some of the parables that Yeshua taught, but you could see several of those parables in there as we were reading through there. So he's not just pulling, Yeshua, when he was doing these parables, he's not just pulling stuff out of the air. They knew what he was talking about. Right. It's not a new concept. Right. Anyone else? Okay. So now it's time to